Good morning. It's my great honor to speak with you today, and I want to extend my gratitude to Harris Khwaja and his colleagues at IBC and to the British Journal of Surgery for inviting me to share my thoughts on an issue that sits at the intersection of innovation, surgery, and sustainability. The future of single-use instruments in surgery is more than just a technical discussion. It's a question of how we balance our unwavering commitment to patient care with our responsibility to the world we all share and the future of health. As surgeons, we are tasked with treating disease and saving lives. That responsibility is both profound and humbling. But today, I want to ask you a question. How can we continue to innovate while addressing the environmental cost of our practices? The numbers are staggering. Globally, healthcare generates 4.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions. In the United States alone, hospitals produce over 7,000 tons of waste every single day at an annual cost of disposal of about $10 billion. Each hospital spends 3 to 5% paying waste for waste to be disposed. That's enough waste to fill multiple Olympic-sized swimming pools in just 24 hours. This waste includes single-use instruments, packaging, and other materials from the take, make, waste linear supply chain, where manufactured products are used once and discarded. 85% of this waste is non-regulated, meaning it could be recycled or composted because it's not infectious, but it rarely is. If this waste only occurred in an extraordinary circumstance, perhaps we could justify it. But as we saw during COVID, while single-use supply chains are convenient, they are also fragile, vulnerable to catastrophic disruption. We felt this firsthand with PPE shortages, and it is a sobering reminder of how unsustainable our global supply chain systems can be. This type of supply chain doesn't just harm the planet, it drives up the cost of healthcare itself. And this is not just an environmental problem, it's a systems problem. The question is, how long can healthcare sustain practices that are fundamentally out of sync with principles of circularity and the good of public health, where we reuse, recycle, and repurpose rather than discard? At the core of the issue lies the perception of safety. The single-use model has been justified by the belief that disposable tools reduce infection risk. But is that perception accurate? To demonstrate an absolute decrease in surgical site infections from a single intervention would require a study of 500,000 patients. And infection rates have fallen from 4 to 6% in 1987 to 2% in 2009. But that decline is not credibly attributed to single-use instruments. Although inherently more convenient and allowing for increased numbers of procedures, the drop in infections is much more likely due to improved host defenses like glycemic control and normothermia and evidence-based protocols for standardized care. In the age of AI and real-world evidence, we now have the tools to gather the data necessary to answer these core concerns about safety conclusively. But there are entrenched interests in our system, from manufacturers to regulators, that will resist change, each for their own reasons. Let's review them. Device consumers, you and I, and healthcare systems are driven by liability concerns primarily. Fanning the flames of these fears has resulted in a significant increase in healthcare expenditures. Yet a 2018 paper from the US and Canada showed that reprocessing could reduce hospital solid waste by 7,100 tons and save $470 million. It is a small but convincing paper that illustrates a step in the right direction. If we knew that single-use instruments did not improve surgical site infections, would that be enough to convince us? Would we or our hospitals be willing to turn away from the extra volume generated by increasing numbers of surgeries? Some hospitals in the global north drive up to 65% of their revenue from surgery. Is surgery, in the end, the best answer to disease? The original equipment manufacturers are driven by their business models. Rather than plan for circularity, they sometimes create deliberate obsolescence. Examples are labeling disposables as single use, even when they can be repurposed. Some implement more flimsy construction or put unnecessary crevices in devices that make them hard to clean and impossible to reuse. Some glue together joints to make the instruments harder to disassemble. And when you include chips and proprietary software to the function of a single-use instrument, it creates barriers to multiple use. In short, these instruments are designed to be discarded. And there is also the wow factor for surgeons. Single-use instruments often seem like magic to the surgeons and staff. The first time I fired an automated stapler that the company engineers had driven all night from the place where it was made to deliver it to the OR, a feeling of wonder came over me. It was so beautiful, that staple line that was created without the motion of my hand. As a seamstress since a young age, I appreciated the precision between hand-sewn and stapled or machine-made staple lines. They seemed inherently better. It is not that I do not appreciate this magic, but only now do I begin to understand the cost of it. In addition, regulatory, accrediting, and professional standards groups are often at odds with conflicting roles and responsibilities, and that fragmentation creates uncertainty in regulation and fosters a system where sustainability falls by the wayside of regulations. Now let's take a moment to fully grasp the scale of this issue. 7,000 tons of waste a day. That's enough to fill 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools every 24 hours. And the problem isn't just about finding more landfill space. The waste generated in hospitals contributes directly to greenhouse gas emissions, accelerating climate change and threatening the very ecosystem that supports life on this planet. Access to these wonders is limited to the global north in large part. Many of our colleagues do not have access to the same materials and could not afford them if they did, creating inequity. Beyond the environmental mental impact, there's also financial strain. Hospitals already struggling with rising costs are spending billions on waste disposal, funds that could be better spent on patient care, research, and innovation. And here is where we as surgeons could play a critical role. Every time we open a new set of single-use instruments, we contribute to the growing waste problem. But what if we could change that? We have already proven that we can evolve. In bariatric surgery, we've moved from open procedures to laparoscopic procedures and now robotic surgery. These advancements, coupled with implementation of quality systems, have reduced mortality from 1 in 200 patients in 2000 to 1 in 1,000 patients in 2024. This evolution in surgical technique is a testament to our ability to innovate. However, bariatric surgery and most other surgical interventions come at the cost of potential complications and mortality. And while we have refined our methods, we must acknowledge that surgery alone cannot address the broader systemic issues driving the obesity epidemic, which now affects over 40% of Americans. As I have noted in my many travels this last year, there are also large amounts of population affected in the UK, on the Navajo reservation, in Jordan, and in India. For decades, we've emphasized diet and exercise as primary methods to combat obesity, and they remain important to general health. But we know that these approaches, while important, have not reversed the tide of obesity epidemic at scale. Some argue that operating on more patients would make a significant impact, but the cost of this approach is unsustainable financially in any society on Earth. That brings us to a critical point, the profit-driven perspective of increasing surgical volume is at odds with addressing the root cause of obesity. whereas emerging treatments such as GLP-1-like agonists, like semaglutide, and the 40 other drugs in the pipeline offer a less invasive, scalable solution that targets the underlying biology of obesity. These pharmaceuticals provide a viable alternative, particularly when considering long-term healthcare costs from obesity-related diseases. Yet we remain entrenched in old paradigms. Why? Because change is hard, especially when it threatens established practices and financial incentives. This isn't the first time we've resisted change. Consider the story of peptic ulcers. For years, surgeons treated ulcers with vagotomies, stomach surgery, and resections, convinced that they were addressing the problem. But in the 1980s, two scientists, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren, discovered that ulcers were caused by H. pylori, a bacteria. Despite compelling research, the medical community was slow to accept this new understanding. And this example parallels bariatric surgery. When we believe a mechanism of action be true, but we don't truly understand the underlying pathophysiology, then we will eventually be doomed to fail. Correct diagnosis is essential, but itself is insufficient. Understanding the mechanism of effective treatment as it relates to that pathology is what is necessary. We continued performing invasive procedures for peptic ulcer disease long after antibiotic therapy had been shown to be far more effective. Today, we face a similar challenge with obesity. Obesity is not merely a failure of personal responsibility or excess lifestyle. It is a complex, multifactorial disease. And yet we continue to rely on surgery as the primary treatment when medications like GLP-1 agonists offer a far less invasive, scalable solution. The lesson here is clear. Resistance to change is a part of our history. But if we don't learn from that history, we risk ignoring the growing evidence that our healthcare systems, much like the treatments we offer, are unsustainable. As we envision the future of healthcare, we must place sustainability at the core. This is not just about environmental responsibility, but about social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Equitable access to technology is essential. If the latest AI-driven diagnostics and continuous health monitoring, or surgical staplers, are accessible only to the wealthy, we will fail to create a just healthcare system. Our current model is also economically unsustainable. We spend vast resources treating late-stage disease. AI and real-time health monitoring, diagnostics, and wearables can enable earlier interventions, preventing costly advanced stage treatments. And finally, the healthcare sector's environmental footprint is massive. By focusing on prevention and precision, we reduce the need for large-scale, resource-heavy interventions in late-stage disease. The future of healthcare will be defined by our ability to innovate sustainably, but none of this will happen automatically. It requires leadership. It requires us to be leaders. The future is indeed full of promise, but will require us to rethink how we approach innovation and sustainability. One of the most transformative shifts will come not just from new and less invasive surgical techniques, but from a business model transformation, a move toward performance-based services that optimize healthcare delivery and reduce waste. A concept I've promoted in my work is health as a service. Instead of selling disposable products or tools, companies can provide medical devices and instruments as a service. This means the manufacturer remains responsible for the entire life cycle of the product, from production to maintenance, sterilization, and eventual recycling. In this model, their revenue comes from the performance and durability of their instruments, not in the number of disposables sold. For example, imagine that instead of purchasing single-use staplers for each surgery, healthcare providers could lease staplers as part of a broader surgical service. The company would be incentivized to extend the lifespan of each tool, reducing both environmental impact and cost. This shift aligns financial incentives with sustainability, encourage manufacturers to produce high quality, long lasting tools. Alternatively, a supply chain tax that covered the cost of disposal of medical waste could be levied against manufacturers, providing a negative incentive of 3 to 5% to change the paradigm of this single-use instruments. Health as a service isn't just a theoretical idea. It's already being implemented in multiple other industries. Now it's time for healthcare to embrace this approach. Servicization and performance-based models are powerful tools for reducing waste while improving patient care. In addition to servicization, artificial intelligence will allow us to optimize resources in real time, reducing waste even further. Imagine an operating room where AI tracks every tool, every material used, minimizing excess. Blockchain use could ensure the ethical sourcing and lifestyle tracking of every device, while quantum computing will enable entirely new models of care to be discovered that are more efficient and less wasteful. The arc of healthcare is moving inevitably toward health-centered systems, where diagnosis and intervention occur earlier, not in mid to late stage disease, but in early stage and finally, predictive phase, where we are preventing disease before it manifests. But this shift requires rethinking our tools, our system, and even the business models that drive innovation. I have said longevity is the ultimate form of sustainability, and longevity is at the core of this conversation. Sustainability in healthcare isn't just about the environment. It's about recreating systems that can endure, including ours. Servicization represents a key strategy to extend the life of tools and materials we use, aligning the goals of healthcare providers and manufacturers with the needs of patients and the planet. In fact, sustainability and circularity will be necessary for life on Mars, where every single gram of every substance costs thousands of dollars to obtain. Sustainability will be the only option for life there. As we stand on the cusp of this new era, I urge you all to embrace the changes ahead and, in fact, to lead those changes. The future of healthcare will not be defined by the problems we face, but our willingness to innovate and build systems that promote longevity and sustainability for our patients and for the world around us. When we stole fire from the gods, we were both warmed and burned by it. Eventually, one of us, probably a surgeon, invented a fire extinguisher. The winds of change are blowing, and together we will shape a future where healthcare is sustainable and longevity achievable for the sake of our patients, our planet, and the generations to come. Thank you.